Hello, and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Since tomorrow is Halloween, I thought I'd present something appropriately spooky for the occasion. Dipping into the archives, I found this great interview with Kat Richardson, former library volunteer and author of the Greywalker series of novels. After a brush with death on the job, Seattleite and private investigator Harper Blaine becomes a Greywalker, a human aware of the supernatural beings that exist among us. The ensuing mysteries she tackles involve ghosts, witches, vampires, and more, and span the length of 9 books. She was interviewed in December 2008 for the third book in her series, titled Underground. The interview was conducted by former volunteer Jeff Cavanaugh. A quick word of warning, Richardson reads an excerpt from her book that describes a crime scene with a dead body. The contents of that section might be a bit too intense for very young listeners. Without further ado, here's their conversation.
I'm your host, Jeff Cavanaugh, and in studio today with me is Kat Richardson with her third book in the Greywalker series. The title is Underground. It's available from Rock Books. It's going to be $21.95 in a hardback this time instead of trade paperback. And let's welcome her to the studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jeff. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for taking the time to come and speak with us. I'm so excited.
You're excited.
That it's a hardback this time. I thought it was going to be 3 trades.
That's what we originally thought, but sales of the first 2 were so good that the publisher felt that the book really deserved an upgrade to hardbound.
So before we actually start on the book, there are going to be some people who have not had a chance to learn about you and how you got to where you are and the various things that you've done to get to this point. So let's have a little recap about the author, Kat Richardson.
Oh, well, I used to be a technical editor, and I've worked in magazines, and was working on fiction for a while. Finally sold the first book, which was Greywalker, and it went on sale in October of 2006. It's the first in the series. It's about Seattle private investigator Harper Blaine, who dies for 2 minutes, and when she comes back, she has the ability to see ghosts, vampires, magic, and have a physical presence in this paranormal world. So things start to get kind of crazy for her, and she ends up with a lot of very weird cases. She's not particularly fond of this job, but she does the best she can.
So in the first book, we are introduced to her and the various shall we say, paranormal denizens of Seattle. And, of course, all the books are set in Seattle.
Yes. Well, let me put a caveat in that. The book I'm currently working on, book number 4, which is tentatively titled Vanished, has a large segment in London. Uh-huh. But for the most part, they're centered in Seattle. She's a Seattle resident. She doesn't plan on moving. So
set in Seattle for the most part. So we're introduced to the various paranormal denizens of Seattle and its environs in the first book. And we learn a little bit about how Harper is trying to control her abilities. And then you take a little farther in the second book.
Yeah, and that continues on into Underground, the third book, which is coming out today. So she has more control over what she's doing and a little bit better understanding, but she's still not an old hand, and Underground takes place only a few months after the events in Poltergeist, which was book 2. So it's less than a year since she's learned how to do this, and she's still grappling a little with the weirdness of it all.
Considering she had a vampire for a client, and she's made a rather an enemy of another vampire.
Yeah, she does get involved with the local vampires in book 1. Book 2 was mostly about ghosts and spirits hanging around after the fact and people doing scary things. Book 3's got some more vampires in it, although they play a relatively small part. Mostly they don't help her. Mm-hmm. Book 3's largely got zombies, ghosts from the past, and a monster.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to choose the monster that you chose to write about.
Well, there's kind of a funny story about the monster. I felt that I should have something that was kind of a local legend, something that went back a bit into Northwest history. And so I started looking at local Indian lore and legend, and I found this terrific monster, but it had a very funny-sounding name. And when I proposed it, both my agent at the time and my editor laughed at me and said, "Oh boy, that's just going to break everybody's suspension of disbelief. They'll be laughing so hard. Who can believe a monster with a name that goofy?" And I said, "I'll bet you I can make it scary." So that was the big challenge here, was to take this Native American monster from the Pacific Northwest with this goofy name and make it scary. And I think it came out pretty well.
And the name was?
He's the Sissy-Oodle. I don't want to give away too much. You really need to read the book, but he is actually a creature in Quacky-Oodle legend, and he's kind of a scary beast. He changes shapes and does a lot of other scary things and likes to eat a lot.
And so that's how we're actually presented with the first kind of inkling of what's going on, is a body that's Harper's friend Quentin discovers. In fact, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and read a short passage from the book that sort of introduces us to that, if you don't mind.
Well, sure.
And this is a reading by Kat Richardson, the author of Underground.
And this passage starts down in the Great Northern Tunnel. It's our train tunnel here in Seattle. Quentin and Harper have come down here so that Quentin can show her whatever it is he thinks he's very worried about. The cement lining the tunnel was about 4 foot thick at that point, but someone had managed to make a hole through it about 2 feet across and 3 feet high. Lying at the foot of the hole was a dead man, scruffily bearded and dressed in ragged layers of filthy clothing. One of his legs was missing from mid-thigh down. I stepped back, repelled. "Damn, Quentin. He must have been hit by a train." I've seen bodies before, but this one upset me more than I cared to admit. There was something wrong about its disposition that unnerved me and urged me to flee. Quentin shook his head. "I don't think so. There's no blood, and if you look at the wound, it looks kinda chewed." In spite of myself, I moved forward and peered at the poorly illuminated corpse. The leg ended in a gnawed stump, and though it was hard to be sure with the amount of dirt on his clothes, there truly didn't seem to be any blood. He stunk of filth and smoke, but the guy hadn't been dead very long. Even discounting the cold and the darkness and the indifference of the station crew, someone would have spotted him if he'd been lying there for more than a day. He also had a shroud of gray clinging to him and raveling away into the hole. I took another step closer and looked harder at the hole, professional curiosity fully engaged. The edges flickered with ethereal strands of something gray, gleaming with a soft white and pale yellow luminescence. Although the pall of energy lying over the corpse was suitably black for death, I thought, the strands that led away from it into the hole were a neutral gray that looked as soft as Angora. I shuddered at the idea, but I reached out and rubbed a bit of the nearest strand between my fingers. To me, gray material usually feels icy cold, alive, and electrified, but aside from a cottony sensation, I couldn't feel anything this time. I touched my finger to one of the brighter bits adhering to the broken edges of the cement and got a mild tingle from it as it wriggled away like a worm on a sidewalk. I tried to look into the hole, but I couldn't get my head craned around far enough with the body lying where it was. "It goes all the way back into the basement of the building on the other side," Quentin said, watching me. I glanced at him. "How do you know?" He turned his face away from mine. "I crawled into it." "All right," I said, straightening up. "I'd like to know how you happened to find him. This isn't exactly a public thoroughfare." Quentin kept his mouth shut. I sighed and thought of Will's admonitions of the morning. I'd better call the cops. "I'd rather you didn't just yet." "What?" A rumbling sound started far away, and a rhythmic vibration set the gravel on the tunnel floor to chattering. "Train! Come on!" Quentin grabbed my wrist and hauled me along as he started back the way we'd come. We dashed out of the tunnel and cut to the side, pressing ourselves to the wall outside the opening, just a few feet ahead of a shrieking freight train. Something pale flipped and tumbled through the air from beneath the engine's wheels, landing on the gravel barely a yard from us. It was an arm. Quentin's eyes widened and he looked sick. I wanted to gag, but swallowed the urge. There was something particularly awful about that mangled, lonely limb lying on the gravel outside the Great Northern Tunnel, but puking wasn't going to improve the situation. "That's it," I said, pulling my cell phone off my belt. "I'm calling the cops." Quentin clamped his hand over mine. He was sweating, though. I didn't know how anyone could in that cold air. "No, not now, please." I shook his hand off mine and gaped at him. "Why the hell not? That's a dead body, a dead person in there. He's not the first." Damn it, I thought. I clipped my phone back on my belt and crossed my arms over my chest, glaring at him. It seemed like a better idea than screaming and trying to run away. I had trusted Quentin with secrets and lives, including mine, and I realized then that I knew very little about him. And now he was showing me bodies in tunnels and saying they weren't the first? I let one hand drift down my side toward my holster. "Talk fast," I said. "Just give me a chance to get out of sight," he said. "I don't want the cops to know I'm connected to this." "Connected to what? And what is it with you and cops?" He looked around, but no one was coming out of the station to investigate us, nor was anyone stopping on the icy sidewalk above us. Any pedestrians were too anxious to get out of the cold to pause and look down at the gravel by the tunnel mouth. Look, this guy, he's not the first dead body to turn up around Pioneer Square since the big storm. I knew some of them, and there was that article in the paper about the leg found in the construction site near the football stadium. You read about that, right? Yeah. They never found the guy it came from. So? Something nasty is happening, and I'm afraid they'll connect me to it. Why? You wanted me to see this, but you don't want it reported. What kind of connection do you have to this? What the hell is going on? I generally prefer anger over fear. I don't know what's going on, but I want it to stop, and I don't want the cops digging around in the underground over this, or at least not digging around near me. If you think someone is killing bums, that has to be reported to the police. That's what they do. Find the people who prey on other people. What if it's not a person? What? I demanded, feeling colder inside than out. Quentin started to reply, but my phone burred and cut him off. I swore and snatched it from my belt, glaring at Quentin and pointing at him with my other hand. Hold that thought.
Once again, that was an excerpt from Kat Richardson's newest Greywalker novel, Underground. Underground, of course, referring to underground Seattle, the strange sort of interstitial spaces underneath the actual city streets. Tell us a little about that.
Well, Seattle has an interesting history. It's not unique, but the fact that we actually make a big deal about it is kind of unusual. The city of Seattle is actually built on top of the old city of Seattle, effectively. When the Great Fire came along and burned most of what's now the historic district to the ground, people started to rebuild, but it took a while for the streets to be finished. And in order to get the streets up above the tide table, they had to raise them. Well, businesses didn't want to wait, so they went ahead and built their buildings with a lower level that was eventually covered by the streets and sidewalks. That lower level is the current underground city. Most of it's condemned and locked up, but some of it's still accessible either to the business owners or through the underground tour. It's also kind of an interesting place historically, because while they were building the streets, business was still going on. So there were these massive towers of street in between one block and the next, with a little tiny area that was going to be the sidewalk, but it was like walking in a giant pit. And so business was going on, but you literally couldn't see across the street. All kinds of strange things happened, and in later years when the streets were finished, it became kind of the red light district, and then during Prohibition it became a bootlegger's run. It's also been the home of gambling dens in the 1970s, the homeless in the 80s and 90s. The underground city has an interesting history, both when it was still open and once it was condemned. It was officially condemned in 1952. Most of the openings were closed up on a permanent basis, although a few were still accessible. There's been all kinds of strange stuff down there, and there continues to be strange stuff down there. And of course, if you want to see it, you can go on Seattle's Historic Underground Tour. I got a lot of help from the historian of the Underground Tour, a guy named Rick Botel, and he took me down and showed me some stuff, sent me photographs, and we had a lot of discussion about things they don't tell you on the underground tour because, well, it's rated PG.
Or even R.
Yeah, upon occasion you can get kind of the R-rated tour. I got the, oh my God, that's horrible tour.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There are no pictures of the downtown in Seattle during the reconstruction of the streets because the city fathers didn't want anyone back east to know that there were these, in some cases, 2-story deep pits where the sidewalks should be. They thought it didn't look very good. So it's very hard to find a picture of any of these holes in the ground that were the sidewalk.
Plus, people were dying as they tried to cross the street.
Oh, yeah, all kinds of great things happened. They called it an inadvertent suicide because people would occasionally fall off the street edge down into the sidewalk, break their necks, and die. But of course, no one wanted to say it was an accident because then the city would be its fault. So they said, oh, inadvertent suicide. And you can actually read reports in old copies of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which was the first paper, talking about people falling to their deaths by inadvertent suicide.
And plus, they filled those interstitial gaps with just about anything they could.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
the street itself was filled with anything and everything. Old stonework and wood from the fire, dirt, dead animals, broken carts, old furniture, bits of anything they could drag up, they threw in. So every time the city of Seattle is forced to do any kind of major excavation in the old historic district, they find interesting things in the road. All kinds of great stuff has come to light that's very interesting to us, but at the time it was just garbage.
Right. Now, how much research do you have to do, considering that you're setting your books in a contemporary real city? I mean, you have to do a lot of research into the various architectures, the buildings. You've got Pioneer Square all through the book. So you're mentioning the parking garage that looks like the sinking ship. And I mean, all these different things. You really have to do a lot of research, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, some of it kind of gets into your head just because I live here and I go out and I wander around and I read historic plaques and I ask people stupid questions. And sometimes I actually have to go out and do research. A lot of very useful stuff came out of an architectural treatise that I found that was written by a couple of professors at the University of Washington, and they were talking about the influence of a particular architect. But as a result, they ended up talking about 3/4 of the buildings in Pioneer Square were influenced by this one Eastern architect. And so they had terrific information about the building as it currently exists, or if it had been destroyed since it was erected, what had happened to it, what building was there before, what it was bought for, what it was originally built for, what it had been converted to, what had been there before, and what had happened to it. So I was able to get a lot of information from that. I also just recently discovered a new website, and the name is slipping my mind. I think it's Antique Seattle, but they cover a lot of the same kind of issues, talking about the past of Seattle and where you can still kind of see it and where it's disappeared. Research like that is pretty much invaluable since I want to be looking all the time at the ghosts of Seattle as well as current Seattle. Current Seattle's easy, you just walk out onto the street and there it is. Mm. But finding out what used to be there can sometimes be hard. Luckily, Seattle is full of people who are obsessed with the history of Seattle, and so there's a lot of great documentation out there.
One of the other themes in the book was about homeless folks, especially the ones who sort of make the underground their home, if you can call it that. Aside from the fact that there are people who live in the underground, what kind of made you make some of these people your co-stars in this book? Well,
I wanted to write a monster in the sewer book, but of course sewers are not actually as interesting as an underground city, and since we had one, that's what I figured would be kind of interesting. The idea of a city that is both visible and invisible is kind of interesting, and it seemed to me that the people who were the natural denizens of that are the human beings who are invisible to us, the kind of modern-day American untouchables, which, of course, is our homeless in urban environments. And having spent a lot of time around Pioneer Square, I've seen an awful lot of people wandering around, apparently with nothing to do all day, and they're not just students hanging out. There's an awful lot of homeless living around the Pioneer Square area, and there have been for a long time. Most of the underground's now locked up, but there's still a large community, and they're pretty static, of homeless who are living in the area because it's full of nooks and crannies. There's also a lot of clubs and restaurants who have a lot of leftovers and trash that's worthwhile either in terms of food or things that you can dig out of it and sell or recycle. So it's an interesting area for someone who is kind of getting by on whatever they can get. It's also got a lot of tourists, and frankly, tourists are easy to panhandle from. So I was kind of interested in that, and I started looking into some of the various organizations that have developed in Seattle to support the homeless, get them back into the mainstream, or take care of them while they're still on the streets. We've got a lot of homeless support groups, including some that were actually started by the homeless, like the Seattle Coalition for Homeless and Women in Black, which actually shows up in the book. They're a real organization of mostly women, and they organize memorial services for people who have died on the streets. A lot of people just kind of forget that these poor folks aren't there really because they want to be. They're there because situations cause them to fall out of the mainstream. And that was sort of an interesting idea, so that's where I wanted to play with that.
So, as you were spending time down in Pioneer Square, were you having conversations with some of these homeless people to sort of?
Now, mostly I observed them having conversations with other people.
Or themselves.
Or themselves, yeah. There's an awful lot of people who talk to themselves. But then again, when you're talking to yourselves, at least you know you're not talking to an idiot.
But then again, if I remember correctly, you had at least one of these people in Pioneer Square who seemed to have some sort of connection to the Gray the way Harper does.
Yeah, there are several people who are a little bit on the odd side. Originally, there was a character who was a lot more connected, but I removed him for a later book. But I figured if you were living down there long enough and there really were monsters in the sewer, you'd start to notice.
Right. Now, explain the many appearances of the crows.
Oh, the crows. Crows have a couple of interesting ramifications. A lot of people associate them with death in graveyards. And the Native Americans, especially in the Pacific Northwest, look upon them as not only the harbingers of death, but messengers of the gods. They're the carriers of messages between the gods living in the sky and those of us down here. They can also be our avatars in certain kinds of magical battles. So there were a lot of crows in this book. Since I was dealing with a Native American monster, I figured it needed to be surrounded by other Native American things. It wouldn't be there in isolation. It would have, the whole complement. So the crows came along with Sissy Udall and the other Native Americans. There's also a lot of Native Americans on the street. It's not unusual for Native Americans in urban environments to be homeless. They'd rather be homeless on the street than feeling like a ward of the state on a reservation. So it seemed to me that among the homeless, we were going to have plenty of Native Americans. Those Native Americans would be familiar with these legends, and eventually Harper ends up talking to some of them and coming to understand at least a little bit more of what's going on through their view of the world from their legends and stories. And that's where the crows came from.
Well, once you'd chosen your monster, so to speak, it seemed like you had quite a bit more research to do into the surrounding legends and customs of the various tribes that sort of believe in that monster.
Oh, yeah. I discovered some things. I had a vague inkling, but I discovered a lot more as I delved into it, that there's one major Indian group in the Pacific Northwest, and most of the tribes are subdivisions of what they call the Northwest Salish. And Northwest Salish can be found from the Queen Charlotte Isles all the way down to the middle of Oregon. There's a division between those who live on the coast and those who live inland on the eastern side of the mountains here. A slight difference in the language, but they're still basically the same group. And they have a lot of the same legends. There's a few regional differences because obviously people living on the deserty side on the eastern side of Washington are going to view things a little differently than people who live right on the ocean. But they share a lot of the same legends, and they're all related to the Kwakiutl and a few other Salish tribes.
Lushootseed.
Lushootseed is the language of the Salish, and all of the various Indians up and down this area speak some variation of Lushootseed, which I got to play with a little bit. There's also little groups within the group who don't get along with someone, and so there's rivalries, like the one set of Salish don't particularly get along with the Macaw, and people in Seattle may recall a controversy about whale hunting a few years ago with the Macaw tribe. But the Macaw are also Salish. They're the cousins of all the other Salish, like the Muckleshoots and the Macaw are two totally different subgroups, but they're related. There's a bunch of other strange things about the way they pass information along, and you see big variations from the far north to the far south. I was also kind of lucky in that a local guy here around 1920 decided that he really wanted to preserve some of these legends and stories. His name was J.G. Ballard, and he went out and had local Indian elders talk to him and his friends, and they would record it. At the time, they didn't have great recording devices, so they literally wrote it all down by hand in Lushootseed and then figured out how to translate it, along with the help of some of the local Indians who spoke pretty good English. So there's a book available in the Seattle Public Library, and it's Ancient Legends of Seattle Indians, if I remember correctly, and it's by J.G. Ballard and Company. It's a transcription of his original transcriptions of all of these stories, and that was a great resource. All the variations of stories like the Sisters Who Married Stars or Raven and Coyote. There's terrific stories right there, and I drew on quite a few of them. I got a nice ogre out of this, and she's a very unfriendly sort of person. And ogres are considered just monsters in general. There's no such thing as a good ogre. There's no Shrek for American Indians. But she was an awful lot of fun to write about.
Now, explain how you managed to mix zombies into this whole thing. If we didn't already have enough with Harper's connection to the Grey and the dead bodies and the Native American monster, we know we got to throw some zombies in too.
Well, yeah. Zombies are kind of the hot thing, if you can say that. Flaming zombie. So, zombies seemed like a logical extension of having these dead people kind of stuck between here and there. Also, I needed some indication that there was something tremendously wrong. I mean, it's bad enough to find dead bodies that have been gnawed on, but to find dead bodies who've been gnawed on and won't lie down has got to be pretty disturbing. So I kind of stuck them in. It's a little bit of a violation of the legend, but hopefully no one will come after me with forks and flaming brands for this.
Or the zombies will come after you. You've misrepresented us. We want your brains.
Zombie Union.
Well, I think we have used up our half hour, so we're gonna have to cut this short for now. But thank you again for coming in and sharing the new book with us. Again, the title is Underground, third book in the Greywalker series. Rock Books has published it. It's $21.95 in a hardback. It's going to be out by the time this airs. It'll be out in bookstores everywhere. I highly recommend you read the series and pick up this book as well because it was a really good read. Kat Richardson, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Underground is available in our catalog as an audiobook with the class ID DBC 15897. If you'd like to start the Greywalker series from the beginning, the first book, titled Greywalker, is available as an audiobook with the class ID DBC 16871. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.